Thank you, everyone, for coming and joining us for this important meeting tonight. We've got some problems technically, but I think we can resolve it. I'm not able to control the session, but Tony will help me because he is able to do so. So thank you for coming for this very important discussion. We have 5 speakers, and I'll introduce them one by one when they speak. I just wanted to say before we start that this is probably the most important meeting we are going to have in the next few months, because the place of Germany with the question of Zionism has been taken over from any other topic in Europe or outside of Israel. And we have a situation where German politicians are telling people like us here on the panel that we are anti-Semites. They're telling people whose families were destroyed in the Holocaust that as Germans, they are able to tell between a good Jew and a bad Jew. This is an incredible development, and I'm sure people will be relating to it when they speak. Our first speaker is Wieland Hoban. Wieland is a composer, translator, and also the chair of Jüdische Stimme, and the co-organizer of the Berlin Palestine Conference. He has been speaking at many events, including those in London on the national demo events, and actually, like 4 others on the group, has been in the Anti-Zionist Congress that ended on Sunday in Vienna. Thank you very much for joining, Wieland. The stage is yours.
Thank you very much. Yeah, as you say, this is a very urgent subject, but in many ways, not just for the Palestine movement, because the way in which Zionism and anti-Semitism are being manipulated in Germany follows a pattern that's definitely not unique to Germany. We see it also in the USA, we see it in the UK. I would say that it's particularly intense in Germany. Now, we know that it's become very popular among right-wing politicians, right-wing demagogues also, to use anti-Semitism against the left, despite fairly strong indications that they themselves harbor some anti-Semitic feelings. You know, we have the far-right European axis with, Hoban, Meloni. We have Trump, and in fact, many other Republicans, many of them also Christian extremists, who have so conflated Zionism and Jewish identity that any opposition to Israel, whether it's just kind of cosmetic or fundamental, is used as a way, is criminalized basically, or tarred with the charge of anti-Semitism. And this is also coupled, unfortunately, with a discourse around Jewish vulnerability and Jewish safety that is also very harmful and is very often pursued in bad faith. And I think all of the viewers from the UK will probably be familiar with the way Jeremy Corbyn was politically assaulted with this, and how the supposed safety of Jewish members of the public, or perhaps members of a party, or also students, can even itself be used as a weapon against the Palestine movement, or not even activists, just people sympathizing with the cause of Palestine in some way. And what I think often some of these Jewish groups don't see, especially in Germany, which has a much smaller Jewish population than, of course, the USA or also UK, is that though some of them I know genuinely have become used to feeling a sense of threat from the Palestine cause, in perpetuating this discourse, they themselves become tools of the far right, because then all the far right demagogues can say, look, Jewish people are scared because these extremists are threatening them. And as a matter of fact, the weekly news magazine Der Spiegel in Germany, which is internationally known, in mid-October 2023, so 1 or 2 weeks after October 7th, there was an issue which on the cover had pictures of well, one found out if one read the article that they were various Jewish people in Germany with sort of fearful and worried expressions, and the title was "We Are Afraid." And as it happens, the previous issue, the week before that, had a photo of then Chancellor Olaf Scholz saying, we have to deport on a large scale. Now, this juxtaposition actually kind of sums up in a very compact form what this is about, because this is about using anti-Semitism as a weapon in the arsenal of racists who want to incite hostility against migrants, most of all Muslims and Arabs, and use this as a way to derive a kind of moral legitimacy from that. And it's very clear also how they themselves other Jews and kind of objectify them into something that they can just use. And I mean, not long ago, the current Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, made a reference to the Jewish flag when he was talking about an Israeli flag. And that same magazine, Der Spiegel, referred on 2 separate occasions to the Jewish embassy when they were talking about an Israeli embassy. And well, that same politician, Friedrich Merz, has recently spoken about how Israel is doing the dirty work for all of us by basically wreaking havoc in the Middle East, which actually I think is a very honest way to just declare his commitment to imperialism. I mean, I didn't find it shocking in that sense, because it's really saying the quiet part out loud, which is, I think, basically the new style of politics that we know from Trump also, without the moralistic cover story. But in any case, one might ask, why is the right wing, so concerned about anti-Semitism? And I think that really just makes it clear that this is not a good faith accusation. And really, when, if you follow German social media, especially Twitter, where a lot of these journalists will be, fighting with other people, and you see that some of the people who most aggressively use the charge of anti-Semite and who most emphatically talk about so-called Jewish life that has to be protected, that these are people on the right. And I mean, historically, what sort of positions or inclinations does the right have towards Jews? And this already, I think, is just should make anyone ask, at least, why this has come to be the case, that those people who go on most about anti-Semitism are from the right, and that we always hear these accusations against the left. And I think probably others, Iris will talk a bit more about the sort of the social psychology of this, also the kind of German perpetrator trauma, which also exists. But I think it's just very clear that identifying with the role of someone who fights anti-Semitism, and it doesn't matter whom you're fighting, whether it's Jews or not, but this idea of being someone who fights anti-Semitism is a kind of virtue signaling in this very actually mainstream way, the same way one would say, I support NATO, I support the EU, and I'm a warrior against anti-Semitism. This is part of being part of the establishment, and it's therefore quite logical that the far right would use it as a way in to being accepted as part of the establishment. And in Germany, you see that when the far right AfD party also embraces the anti-Semitism discourse. Of course, we know that they just want to deport all migrants, but it gives them a way in to get legitimacy, because if you repeat the same slogans, if you say that preserving Jewish life is the most important thing, in the abstract, of course, one doesn't need real Jews to do that, then this means that you can take part in the political establishment.
You got 1 minute.
Yeah, I was actually going to stop there because I think we have a lot of speakers today, so no need to continue. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much for this important introduction, Wieland. I wanted to remind everyone that if you have now or later a question for the panel, please put it in the Q&A, not in the chat, in the Q&A, so we can actually locate all the questions. And following Wieland is Ronnie Kasrils. Ronnie Kasrils is a lifelong fighter for freedom and democracy. He was actually the former commander of the military wing of the ANC. This is an unusual role for a Jewish white person in South Africa. And he then was the Minister of Police in Nelson Mandela's government. He's a lifelong opponent of racism, and he will speak about the first genocide that the Germans have responsibility for, and that is, of course, in Africa itself. Thank you, Ronnie.
Thanks very much, and good evening, everybody. Just to say, I wasn't the overall commander of our armed wing. I was at one stage, the chief of military intelligence, and also not chief of police, but of the intelligence services. But it's very moving for me to be present with you today and to be asked to speak. I want to immediately state that the notion of German guilt for the Holocaust is a ruse, and it's a ruse of the German ruling class to justify its its rationalization for its special relationship with Israel, because that actually is something of a fig leaf. It's a convenient device, this question of the guilt of the Germans, given the immense profits that Germany makes from doing business with Israel, and primarily in the arms and security industry. So there's a question of real economic interest at play, as well as the US and EU's geopolitical strategic interests in a gendarme of Zionist Israel in the Middle East. So it's a matter of profitability. It's not the question of morality, because if that was the case, and here I'm chairperson, I come to the question of the first case of genocide in the 20th century, which in fact at one stage became a protectorate of racist South Africa. And that was called Southwest Africa, German Southwest Africa, which after the First World War was put under the protectorate of another racist leader, General Smuts, a great friend of the British Empire. And of course, one is talking about this first case of genocide against the ethnic groups in Namibia, the smallest of the population of Namibia, which was the Herero and the Nama people who rose in rebellion against the absolute barbarism of colonial Germany, steeped in its Prussian mentality, coming late in the game of colonial conquest, that had to make up for lost time by increased savagery. And of course, that was reinforced by the Prussian ethic of warfare and so on. It was the most appalling of genocides, and both the Herero and the Nama people were reduced, and they were small in number, so it's not a numbers game genocide, but they were reduced by at least 80% of the population by, first of all, the dispossession of their land and their cattle and their means of livelihood to be involved in forced labor under this German barbaric regime. Their price for rising in resistance is what we've seen throughout colonial history. So it's not just the question of German colonialism, but the savagery of this, I've referred to, was exacerbated by Germany becoming a late colonial power and the need to quickly catch up, reinforced by the question of the Prussian militarism, which was hegemonic in German elitist society, from political to economic interests, and essentially the scientific arena, in which, in terms of the genocide, what we saw like an arrow moving through from that first genocide to the Nazi Holocaust was the question of quasi-science in terms of the anthropology, the so-called eugenics that were developed, that saw the Namibian people I've referred to being treated in the concentration camps in the way in which various people, including Jews and Roma and Slavs and so on, were treated in later period. And the Mengeles and the Auschwitzes have their origin in Shark Island, which is just off the Namibian coast, linked by a causeway to Lüderitz. And this is where the most awful experimentation took place. So the Nazi system does not come out of the blue, out of some kind of vacuum. It is linked with this aspect of colonialism and of the German variety, of course, whether it was Belgium, Portuguese, British, Spanish, the Netherlands, the French, they were all diabolical and connected with those forms of genocide. And this explains exactly why they treat Israel with impunity, because they don't wish to paint Israel as it should be, this colonial settler state, with that same colonial brush, because it points fingers back to them. This is something we need to understand. And the reason why, amongst the geopolitical strategic factors, why Israel receives such impunity and support from the former colonial powers and, of course, the US empire. And this is very important for us to understand. It's important for anti-Zionist Jews to grasp and connect with and project. And as far as morality of Germany is concerned, in terms of the way they say they have to transfer, as the title of this session makes reference to, why they have to provide such support to Israel, links in to all of what I've had to say. And it is absolutely vital that that be grasped. So I don't want to take too much further time, but the question then is to expose exactly what the German ruling elite is about, exactly why it supports Israel, exactly why it uses this fig leaf of anti-Semitism to cover up its crimes, which are linked like an arrow from the Shark Island concentration camp, which gave birth, by the way, to the mentors from the times of Shark Island right through to Mengele and his absolute barbaric experiments in the Holocaust period. So these things connect, and it explains as well why the people of the global South, who have been the victims of colonial barbarism throughout the centuries, all over the world, from the North and South of America to Africa and to Asia. It came back to hit the Europeans under Nazism. But this is all connected. And this, my dear friends, is why the global South and the best of the global South stands very firmly with the international global outrage against Israel, against Zionism. It has nothing to do with anti-Semitism, far from it. In all of the countries I refer to, and I end on this point, in South Africa as well, might be a small minority of the Jewish community, but we have anti-Zionist Jewish comrades here who link in with this worldwide anti-Zionist struggle. We've got to stand by people everywhere that fall prey to the bombs and the barbarism led by the US and by Israel in the Middle East, with bombs now falling on the civilian people, men, women, children of Iran. We are at the most perilous point of world history, and we can only overcome it through our unity with all the people of the world against the barbarism of latter-day colonialism. I'll end on that note. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ronnie, for a very powerful speech and for reminding us the complexities of the international scene when Germany is mentioned. You can see, Ronnie, how much people like your presentation. The next speaker is Tom Suarez. Tom Suarez is a well-known author. He has written The State of Terror and Palestine Hijacked, How Zionism Forged an Apartheid State from the River to the Sea. Tom, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to start off by repeating Ronnie's point that the real challenge here is how do we translate our various angles on this issue into action? How do we use this to challenge the German state, in its complicity in genocide, in which the transference of Holocaust guilt to the Palestinians is a core component. Now, the dehumanization of the Palestinians with the Nazi brand name, whether directly or by reference to the Holocaust, serves to justify Israel's crimes, obviously, and thus justify Germany's role as co-conspirator by obviously casting their victims' resistance as motivated by hatred of Jews. All this is self-evident. It is also a core component of the brainwashing of the Israeli public. And in the immediate post-war period, and especially in 1948, this transference of the Holocaust onto the Palestinians served to stop any soul-searching by Jews who had just survived the death camps and were now ordered to exterminate village after village because of people's ethnicity. The war, in effect, was not over. The Nazis had, in effect, not been defeated, but merely been morphed into the Palestinians. By transferring the Nazi brand name to the Palestinians, Germany subliminally presents the Holocaust as the fault of foreigners, or not so subliminally at all, as infamously stated outright by Netanyahu a decade ago with his claim that the Mufti, which the Mufti is used as code for the Palestinians, was the origin of the final solution. So Germany keeps itself in this bizarre contradiction. On one hand, by German law, Netanyahu should have been arrested for Holocaust revisionism the next time he stepped foot in Germany. On the other hand, Germany is quite happy with the psychological inference of this Holocaust transference because it moves culpability for the death camps from the Germans to foreigners, simultaneously insulating the state and vindicating its xenophobia. The rabid support for the Israeli state also serves German anti-Semitism by assuring that there is always a vast ghetto far away to keep Jews. But for me, the final crime and the final irony of Germany's making support for Israel an actual function of the state, and therefore Holocaust transference to the Palestinians an actual, though unwritten, function of the state, is that it requires that Germany not abandon its institutional state racism of 9 decades ago, but merely add the Palestinians to the victim list. To be clear, Germany did not replace Jews with Palestinians as its victim. Jews are still its victims. Germany continues its anti-Jewish crimes of its Nazi days, except that whereas Nazi Germany sought to exterminate Jews physically from without, now Zionist Germany is acting to destroy Jews spiritually from within. For Zionism and Zionist Germany, the Israeli state and Jews are synonymous. What the state does, the Jews, quote unquote, do. Not as individuals who happen to be Jewish, but all Jews as Jews because they are Jewish. Thus, Germany casts Jews as genocidal, conniving criminals because the state and Jews are one. The Israeli state depends on this anti-Semitic construct to exist because it is the mechanism by which criticism of the state is spun as hatred of Jews. And without this grotesque device, the Israeli state could not endure. No matter how many Jews the Nazis slaughtered, they were powerless to make their anti-Jewish libels true. But Zionist Germany is busy trying to succeed in precisely that, destroying Jewry through Zionism rather than Nazism, instead of exterminating Jews, redefining them as monsters. And irony upon irony, in doing so, seeks to vindicate anti-Semitism. It is often said that Israel's crimes contribute to anti-Semitism because it is seen as the Jews committing these crimes. No, well, only if you accept Zionism's ownership of Jews, a crime which Germany mandates by law, and with it, the Palestinians are cast as the new agents of Holocaust. In my view, we should always refer to Germany as Zionist Germany and accuse it of state anti-Semitism, and that as long as it supports the Israeli state, it has not even begun to denazify. I'd like now to tie the transference of Holocaust guilt to the Palestinians to a bit of history. In mid-August of 1939, H.G. Daniels, the Times correspondent in Geneva, was approached by a member of the Irgun, giving his name as Yardani. Yardeni explained that the Irgun is an extensive secret organization throughout Palestine, no surprise, cell-like in structure, and formed, as the journalist recorded it, on Nazi lines. The Irgun focuses on the youth of Jewry abandoning what Yardeni called oppressed Jews as hopeless. What to me is significant about the interview is how the Irgun operative described the organization's purpose. This is a quote. Its purpose is to be in readiness to take action against the Arabs. Now, although the Holocaust proper had not yet begun, in August of 1939, there was zero question that Jews were in great danger, not from the Arabs. But the target was the Arabs. They were the proto-Holocaust identity. The naturalness with which Germany today paints the Palestinians with its Holocaust brush can be better understood by seeing the Nazis and the Zionists as soulmates. During the 1940s, US intelligence, British intelligence, and certain courageous individuals within the Palestine settlements all made direct comparisons, equating Zionism with Nazism. Today, quite the opposite of being an answer to or even a response to historic anti-Semitism, the Israeli state requires that anti-Semitism remain a permanent active menace of humanity. Above all, the Holocaust must continually be invoked, not just in the sense of never again, but the opposite, as something whose specter is forever required in the present. And, of course, the Palestinians, as Zionism's victims, are the ones to fill that role. The Zionist dependence on a perpetual Holocaust was already evident during the war. Setbacks to the Nazi armies during the summer of 1944 caused some concern that Zionism would suffer a setback in turn. To quote Britain's chief secretary in Jerusalem at the time, quote, in political, that is to say, Zionist circles, there appears to be some tendency to fear that Nazi oppression will end before it has been possible to obtain permission for a large number of Jewish refugees to enter Palestine on that account. Ben-Gurion himself, in Jewish agency meetings, worried that the defeat of the Nazis would jeopardize the rationale for settling Palestine, and complained, by the way, that the United States treated Jews as equal citizens because this worked against Zionism. He couldn't say that in public, but what he did say in a public lecture in Tel Aviv in 1944 was that the presumed coming Allied victory, this is 1944, against the Nazis would make matters not better, but worse, bringing, quote, mounting anti-Semitism and, quote, many other countries now ready to enact Hitler's solution rather than just Germany. Moving to the present, several years ago, a Daily Mail headline reported that, quote, Jews feel as threatened as they did in the Holocaust, experts say. An obscene insult to the memory of the Nazis' victims for Israel's benefit. The context was that the source of anti-Semitism is, of course, us, the pro-Palestine crowd. And the reason for invoking the Holocaust is more than grotesque hyperbole. It is, again, to plant the association of the movement for Palestinian justice with Nazism, a lie that both shields Israel and lets Germany deflect from its own history while pretending to act in obligation to that past. And like the smear of anti-Semitism, its invocation of the Holocaust as an accusation is seen as its own proof. This was, of course, the reason for the brilliant, absolutely brilliant, endlessly repeated mantra that October 7th, 2023 was, quote, the deadliest day for Jews since the Holocaust. Now, leaving aside the dubious claim itself, and leaving aside the irony that the reason that, other than a few foreign workers, that the victims were Jewish was that Israel had cleansed the region of non-Jews, the reason for the mantra was obviously not to record statistics, but to present Hamas's action as motivated by hatred of Jews and to paint the 2.2 million people in Gaza as Nazis deserving of annihilation. Naturally, none of this matters except as it serves to end the slaughter and ultimately end the Israeli state. We need an organized, concerted movement that accuses Germany of betraying its historical obligation by supporting another genocidal state, and its exploitation of the Holocaust is integral to that end. The problem we face is that the decades of Zionist fascism against Jews, a large separate topic in and of itself, and the complicity of the entire so-called West long ago turned Zionism into a true cult, with all the connotations of the word cult, except that unlike conventional cults for which the outside world serves as a refuge, the entire West is the cult compound.
1 minute.
I'm sorry?
1 minute.
Okay. Anti-Semitism and Holocaust transference has become, as I see it, a fetish, the altar of cult members. Zionism has created a psychosis in which anti-Semitism is what gives life meaning. Germany's transference of Holocaust guilt onto the Palestinians is a necessary cog in this cult. Thank you.
Thank you very much for giving us the political background of Germany's decision to support Zionism without qualification, as our Prime Minister presents it. The next speaker is also from Germany. Iris Hefets is an Israeli-born psychotherapist and has been an active in Jewish Voice for Just Peace. I think she has set it up and is very well known for speaking in many meetings outside of Germany about the topic. Iris, please.
Yeah, thank you very much also for this invitation. And I think it is indeed very crucial to speak about what's going on in Germany and to understand it. Also because Germany has a major role in Europe, and Germany is now in a very, I would say, a dangerous situation. We are living in a nation or state who is now supporting a genocide, who committed already 3 genocides. It's not only the Holocaust and the genocide in Namibia of the Herero and Nama. It's also on in 1905, the Maji Wars. There was a genocide of Germany in Tanzania. So we are talking about a state that is supporting or that has a serial genocider, a state which is now investing a lot of money in weapon and security industry, and a state in which there is a rise of right-wing powers. So how did we get here? Actually, I mean, Germany was for a long time, I would say, I mean, after the 68 revolts or upheaving, a very anti-nationalistic and anti-militaristic state. There was kind of a, a contra move against the Nazi parents, grandparents, which was also a bit of taboo because they didn't talk a lot about that. And then some people started in private, initiatives to dig into the archives of the family and to look into that, which was a taboo at that time. After the fall of the wall in Germany, which was also a frightening moment for many people, because, this is the punishment that Germany got for its hubris and megalomaniac deeds. Germany started slowly to institutionalize this so-called memory culture, and state took over. And the idea was already, I mean, in the beginning, we just have to imagine that I think something like 7 years after the end of the Holocaust, Germany is establishing a diplomatic relationship with Israel. And Adenauer, the first chancellor of Germany, is saying, the Jews have a lot of power in the world. We have, if we want to go back to the civilized nations, we have to have diplomatic relationship with Israel. So this is also a moment. Of course, it's something anti-Semitic, what he's saying, it's clear. And this is the moment when Germany starts to identify between Jews and Israel. As Tom said, today, it's a complete, there is a complete merge. It's the same. But became such a, a synonym through the years. And Germany started to institutionalize this memory culture, building, for example, the monument for the murdered Jews of Europe, selecting the Jews and Israel as the only victims that are allowed to be memorized, to get compensations for Germany, all the guilt feelings and guilt of Germany is canalized to the Jews. And of course, separating in this way and creating or splitting between Jews, between Sinti and Roma, people in Greece or in Poland or in other places, or gays that were also, or euthanasia victims that were also victims of Nazi Germany. Now, this identification enables Germany, identification of Jews and Israel enables Germany to get over this anti-militaristic and anti-nationalistic taboo. Because if you identify as a good German with Israel, then you are rescuing the Jews in this nature reservation that we build them in the Middle East, and we have to save them there. And take care of Jewish life, like they're calling that in Germany. So Germany is identifying, and this is a state program of scholarships, programs in the school, trips, in the media. The media is full of that, of portraying Israeli as the good Jews and the good victim. And the ones that Germany has now to save. And that helps Germany to overcome this taboo of not being nationalistic and not being militaristic. So we see German ministers, for example, taking tours in military aircrafts in Israel, what is not possible in Germany, for example, because they have still a small army. But they are going to change that. We see how they raise Israeli flags all over. For example, now in many mayories in Berlin, in Germany, state buildings are full of Israeli flags. And this way, they introduced nationalism and militarism again into Germany, and with this moral justification. Now we know that, also in the UK or other places like France, who supported apartheid in Africa are now supporting the genocidal Israel, they have quite of the same policy. But in Germany, there is a moral touch to that, where Germany is claiming that they are doing that in order to protect Jewish life. And many taboos were broken with this time, not only the anti-nationalistic and anti-militaristic, also the way that they are treating Jews. 20 years ago, or something like that, it was hardly imaginable that they will cancel, disinvite, or treat Jews like they do today. Now, there are hardly Jews in Germany. This is also something that we have to understand. We're talking about something like 200,000. All of them are immigrants, and many of them are Christians with German Nazi background, I would say, that converted to Judaism in a state-financed program. So we have many synagogues who are empty. We have many synagogues who are full with people who converted, from being perpetrators to being victims, or from being German to being Zionist. Yeah, and these are the people who are telling us that we are anti-Semites today. So it's not only what Germany did in this time is actually rebuild itself as a new nation by evacuating all the bad stuff that Germans did into the Palestinians. They are, or Muslims, they are the bad guys who wants to exterminate the Jews, which is for them the same as Israel. And Germans are now the new Jews, because they kind of swallowed, I would say, the Jews. They are now having these flags. They identify themselves completely with the Jews, with these innocent victims. So that makes Germans to be the victim. And we see it also in public discourse. So it's so crazy. I hope you all see it. So for example, the president of the police in Berlin, who's a police which is very violent, mainly after the genocide, to people who go on pro-Palestinian protests, for example. This president warned Jews and homosexuals not to go to certain places in Berlin where there are many migrants. So she was asked, I mean, do you have any empiric data to base that upon? I mean, why do you say that? And she said, well, fortunately, nothing happens until now. But our policemen are being attacked anti-Semitically on protest. So you see that the German policemen, belonging to the German state, representing the German state, belonging to an institution that was part of Nazi Germany, they are now the victims of anti-Semitism. If we go, for example, to a demonstration, and I have a sign saying Jews against genocide, then they will arrest me. It will get into the statistics of anti-Semitism in Germany, and the policemen are threatened by me with this sign. So this way, we are talking about a perversion also. It's not only that there is an evacuation of all bad into the Palestinians, it's also that Jews who are not, or I would say, speaking from the belly of the beast, because they swallowed us. And if we are speaking, it means that we are separate, that we are autonomous, that there are Jews who are non-Zionist or anti-Zionist. This is already a crime. We are not allowed to say that in Germany. They have their own Jews, which are the formal Jewish institutions that Germany is financing. They have a newspaper that Germany is financing. All these people who are converting, this is a state program. And these are the good Jews that Germany is selecting, whereas we are the bad Jews that has to be eliminated from the public sphere. That means that we are getting canceled, not only we, I mean, most Jews who are invited to Germany, like, the philosopher Nancy Fraser or Nan Goldin or Masha Gessen, the journalist from the USA, they are not coming, they are coming from abroad where you have Jewish life. We all know why it's not really existing in Germany. So these people are now being disinvited by German civil servants who are saying, I mean, we have our policy, we have to protect the Jews. And they need this figure that Wieland mentioned before of the scary Jew, with which they are working. So the scary Jew, and it doesn't matter why you're scared. I mean, there are no real reasons to be afraid because nothing happened. Almost nothing happened. I don't know of any one case in Germany after the 7th of October where a Jew was being attacked physically, at least, because he or she is a Jew. There is one case of an Israeli young man who was active in student protest and was also aggressive towards pro-Palestinian groups and tearing their posters and whatever, and looking, I mean, there are screenshots of how he's looking to fight with someone. At the end, he found someone that was punching him and he looked indeed bad after that. But that was the case in Germany. The other student was accused being anti-Semitic. And that was also a trigger of Germany to bypass the constitution, and the parliament decides upon a resolution to protect Jewish life, which means they insert secret servants into the universities in Germany. So actually,
could you start concluding?
Yeah. So we are talking about the way that Germany is using the Holocaust and its guilt or guilt feelings, let's say, to protect Jewish life. But this is only the cover story. Underneath this story, we are talking about a way to make Germany great again, like Germany would like. I mean, Germany was never great, but this is the dream. and to insert authoritarian mechanism into the state and to bypass the constitution, which forbid all that. And as a conclusion, I would say, I mean, I think there is an Israeli psychoanalyst who said they will never forgive us Auschwitz. So now I think we're in this point where we can also experience that Germans will never forgive us for being the victims of Auschwitz. Yeah.
Thank you, Iris, for a very powerful speech, and also for reminding us about the Israeli flag flying over official buildings. The next speaker, Tony, will definitely relate to that flag, because this was the only non-German flag that was allowed during the 1930s. And that relates to Tony's book, Zionism Under the Holocaust. Tony is a member of Jewish Network for Palestine. He was arrested, like some of us, on a number of occasions, and he is now currently on bail, awaiting his trial under terrorism charges. Tony, please.
Thank you. I hope everyone can hear me. Yes, I am a dangerous terrorist for having supported the Palestinian resistance on October the 7th. It has been an excellent webinar with a variety of different contributions. And if I pick up on what Wieland said about anti-Semitism, why does the right wing talk about anti-Semitism? Well, I think the answer is very clear, because firstly, they've redefined anti-Semitism not as hostility or hatred to Jews, but as hostility to the Jewish state, that is Israel. So if you're anti-genocide today, then you're also anti-Semitic. And it's no surprise that Donald Trump, for whom Black Lives Matter is an evil phenomena, and any other form of anti-racism is to be deplored, someone who even calls neo-Nazis at Charlottesville very fine people, he is nonetheless really concerned about Jewish students on campus. And if you believe in that, you really do believe that kosher pigs can fly, because I mean, of course, it's an absolute nonsense. And when we look at all the far right who are so concerned about anti-Semitism, people like Geert Wilders, the fascist leader in the Netherlands, for instance, I mean, just ask yourself, where would these people have been 90 or 100 years ago? Would they have been hiding Jews from the Nazis? Of course not. They would have been, in Wilders' case, a member of the NSB, the Dutch Nazi Party, which was attacking Jews. I mean, it was almost uniformly the left, the communists in particular, who were responsible for hiding Jewish children in Belgium and in France and in so on. It wasn't the right wing today who proclaim their opposition to anti-Semitism. So we should be quite clear that the anti-Semitism that is defined by the IHRA has nothing to do with traditional anti-Semitism. I mean, anti-Semitism is very simple. My dad was at the Battle of Cable Street when he fought the fascists in Britain, the British Union of Fascists. He didn't need a definition to know what anti-Semitism was. It was very clear to him. The fact that they need a 500-word definition, which isn't even a definition, it never at any point defines anti-Semitism, is proof that it's not about anti-Semitism. And if you look at the 38-word so-called definition, it applies to both Jews and non-Jews. That is, it applies to everyone. And if it applies to everyone, it applies to no one. I mean, it's really a meaningless definition. And the fact that it's been adopted, this incoherent, unintelligible salad of words, really, is testimony to how incoherent they are as well about anti-Semitism. I wanted also to agree with Ronnie about the German state feeling guilt. I mean, individuals feel guilt. I mean, that's a personal attribute. States don't feel guilt. States are inanimate. I mean, when people say to me, well, does Israel have a right to exist? My response is that no state has the right to exist. Individuals have the right to exist, of course, but states aren't human beings. They're instruments of coercion by and large, and they have no rights whatsoever. I'd also just like to pick up, Iris mentioned that the German state has been involved in 3 Holocausts, and she mentioned quite correctly the Maji genocide, which took place around the time, I think it was 1905 to 1907 in Tanzania, when 300,000 Africans were murdered. And it took till 2023 before the German President Steinmeier went to Tanzania to apologize for what had happened. I mean, the mere fact that it's taken over a century, I think, speaks volumes in itself. But in fact, Iris, there was a 4th Holocaust, which you didn't mention. And that Holocaust was the Armenian Holocaust. Germany was involved heavily in the Armenian Holocaust, where German military advisors signed some of the orders that led to Ottoman deportations of Armenians. A major component of the genocide in World War I, over 25,000 soldiers, German soldiers, and 800 officers of the Imperial German Army were sent to the Middle East to fight alongside the Ottoman Army, with German commanders serving in the Ottoman High Command and General Staff. According to Vakans Dadrian's German responsibility in the Armenian genocide, German generals Bronsart and Betrich served as members of the military mission in Turkey. Bronsart knew about the real purpose of the deportations and did nothing to prevent the mass executions. And a German document of May the 4th, 1916, that the annihilation showed that the annihilation of the Armenians was ordered by German officers. 3 prominent German officials served in both the Turkish army and then in Nazi Germany, and they included Franz von Papen, who was then the Chief of General Staff of the 4th Turkish Army, and as people will know, he served as Hitler's Vice Chancellor. So really, there is not a genocide that the German state hasn't smiled upon. It's been involved in 4, and now it's involved in a 5th genocide, the genocide in Gaza, and it's supplying 30% of the weapons to it. But really, we should not be surprised at all about that, because Germany used Israel in a sense. It was a kind of Siamese twin. In 1952, the reparations agreement was agreed between Germany and Israel. And in essence, Israel was given billions of marks and military equipment, including nuclear technology. And in return, the German state was given its entrance ticket to the Western Alliance. It became absolved of its crimes. And in the 1961 Eichmann trial, strenuous efforts were made to keep out the name of Hans Lobke, who was Chancellor Adenauer's closest advisor, from even being mentioned in the trial. But Lobke was a key person involved in the implementation of the Nuremberg laws, and he interpreted them strictly, so that even if a German citizen had sexual relations with a Jew outside Germany, that was still a criminal offence. And he also introduced a stipulation that all Jews have Israel or Sarah as their first names if their identity wasn't at all obvious. So it's been, from the start, we've seen this intricate and intimate relationship between the German state and the Israeli state. And in many ways, I think it was Tom who mentioned Netanyahu's speech to the 37th Zionist Congress in Jerusalem in 2015. And I just want to quote from a small part of it where he transferred the blame for the final solution from the Germans, from the Nazis, to the Palestinians. He said, quote, "Hitler didn't want to exterminate the Jews at the time. He wanted to expel the Jews. And Haj Amin al-Husseini went to Hitler and said, quote, if you expel them, they'll all come here to Palestine. According to Netanyahu, Hitler then asked, "What should I do with them?" And the Mufti replied, "Burn them." Suffice to say, this is a complete and utter invention. There's actually a transcript of the meeting. It says nothing of the sort. But in any case, the final solution, the Holocaust, had begun in June the 22nd, 1941, with the invasion of Soviet Russia, Operation Barbarossa, when the Einsatzgruppen had come in the wake of the German army, and their instructions were to kill every Jew they could find. And in fact, the first extermination camp, Kolmhof, was set up about a week after the meeting between the Mufti and Hitler. So the idea that it was the Palestinian leader who was appointed by the pro-Zionist British High Commissioner, never forget Herbert Samuel, he was never elected by the Palestinians, that he somehow triggered off the Holocaust and was responsible for it, is an utter and complete invention. But Israel has spent much time in trying to transfer the Nazi label to the Palestinians from the very start. When Holocaust survivors went to Israel, and they were actually forced to go to Israel, most of them wanted to go to the United States, and the Zionists were vehemently opposed to lowering the immigration barriers. They were told that the Arabs were attacking them in the same way as the Nazis attacked them. And of course, they acted accordingly. So, and we've seen that continuously. I mean, the Palestinians of Gaza are called Nazis, new Nazis. Swastika Bearers was the friendship song which called for annihilation, which was broadcast on Israel's public radio, broadcaster Khan. And we've seen a plethora of exterminationist talk and rhetoric in Israel, including by a famous television producer not long ago, suggesting that gas chambers now be installed in Gaza. I mean, this is where Zionism has ended up, but we should not be surprised, because Zionism from the very start was unique amongst the Jewish people in welcoming the Nazis to power. And I'm talking about the leadership of the Zionists, of course. From the very start, I'll try to bring up the Zionist Federation wrote on June the 21st, 1933, a letter to Hitler. It was never answered. There was no reason for them to write this letter. They weren't forced to do it. It was voluntary. And we can take it that what they said.
1 minute, Tony.
Okay, I might just ask for 1 more minute. It said, on the foundation of the new state, which is established a principle of race, fruitful activity for the fatherland is possible. Precisely because we don't wish to falsify these fundamentals, because we too are against mixed marriages and for maintaining the purity of the group, the Jewish group. And that is true. When the Nuremberg laws were condemned in the Eichmann trial, Hannah Arendt, who had written a book about it, said it was ironic that not only under the Nuremberg laws were Jews forbidden from marrying Aryans, non-Jews, but the same was true in Israel as well. A non-Jew cannot marry a Jew. And so in a sense, Israel is the reflection of everything that the Nazis believed in. The principles of race and nation, blood and soil were equally part of the Zionist mission. We see that today with the marriage of the far right, including neo-Nazis, and now the Zionist movement. And it's playing out in Gaza, but also Iran. And it's no surprise that the German state has reacted so enthusiastically to what is happening in Iran. I'll leave it at that, and thank you very much. And I also thank all of the contributors. I mean, your contributions have been wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony, for combining the different threads of the contributions and in a sense, bringing it to a crescendo of arguments. I'm asking all the people, well, 3 of them, who are raising hands to ask their questions in the Q&A, please. And before the meeting, we were written to by Iris Merav Blumenthal, who had some important points to make and asked to be included. So we discussed that, and I invite Merav to speak for a total of 5 minutes, please. You are enabled now, Merav.
Yeah, I've enabled her. I don't know whether I can allow her to become part of the panel or promote to the panel.
No, I've enabled Merav to speak.
All right, okay, fine.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Oh, wonderful. So good evening together. When the invitation reached me, I started to think about my situation. So I'm actually from German Jews from the Rhineland, which is the original Ashkenaz, and we had a very, very different experience. I don't want to elaborate on that because the most important point I would like to make is that Germany, for the past decades, is not a free country anymore. Germany is still under American occupation. And according to my research, the First World War and the Second World War was instigated by the Americans for different reasons. We have, what I didn't mention in my letter, we have the evangelical theories that came up in the 19th century, going all the way back to Martin Luther, which to me is basically a cover-up for the big merchant companies who use that to basically take over different countries, exploit, accumulate wealth, which is today the biggest problem, the extreme accumulation of wealth and exploitation. And not really prepared. I just want to also say that Iris is completely right in her assertion that after that German Nazis, children and grandchildren of German Nazis, all of a sudden started to convert to Judaism and completely take over Judaism. This basically came about because with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union, Germany was flooded with people from the East, which they wanted because they had a problem in their population. They didn't have enough kids. And also in Israel, a lot of Jews left the country. So it was a demographic problem. And in order to give identity to those people who were not Jewish, the whole Holocaust narrative was created because the Great Patriotic War and the loss of life in Russia was the only thing that could be related to people who didn't have a Jewish identity and who were also atheistic, not ethnically Jewish, not spiritually Jewish, with complete no connection. And so at that time, slowly, the whole narrative of German guilt, anti-Semitism was actually created in Germany. Another aspect, what happened at that time, is that Sorry.
I think you have 1 minute to conclude, please.
Is that through the Americans, the Church of Scientology also infiltrated into Germany and plays a very, very big role in the Netanyahu government. They are very connected and also took on a Jewish identity. So in Israel, there are not really a lot of Jews, and even the religious Jews who have been anti-Zionists now have adapted the complete Zionist narrative and the genocidal narrative and hate for Palestinians, who basically are part of the Jewish people ethnically. And
Thanks a lot, Iris.
Thank you.
I want to thank all the speakers and remind people here we have now just over 10 minutes until we must conclude. And if you have a question, I'll ask you again to put it in the Q&A, please. One question that was put into the Q&A is, we have so many different groups that want to get involved. How can we better network JVP, Combatants for Peace, Standing Together, and many more? Any of the panelists that want to answer this? I think Wieland, please speak, Wieland.
There are networks, international networks for Jewish anti-Zionist groups from different countries. There is European Jews for Palestine and Global Jews for Palestine. And in each case, there is a mission statement, statement of principles, which of course a group would have to agree with in order to join the network. And the EJP website is easy to find. The Global Jews website is just about to go online. It's not yet there, but they can be found on Instagram. And I mean, not all groups that are sort of broadly in the pro-Palestine movement, I would say, share all of the principles that I think the panel members here share, which of course is always a factor, but there are ways also to work together without necessarily aligning oneself in that way.
Thanks a lot. I wanted to ask the panelists a question as chair. The other countries in Europe have a similar position to Germany. They don't actually share the German so-called guilt, which you quite correctly pointed out is, of course, not really there. I wish it was, but it isn't there. If Germany has the guilt as cover, what about the other countries in Europe that are actually following the German lead, but they haven't got the same type of guilt that we can project onto them?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll take that if you want as the first contributor. Hold on, let me just spotlight myself. I think it's really that the Holocaust, that a narrative has been created around the Holocaust. 6 million died. Of course, no one mentions Roma or any other disabled, gays, and so on. It's just the Jews. But the Jewish Holocaust has become really an alibi. It's become a narrative which justifies Western imperialism. So there is this emphasis on anti-Semitism as the only form of racism which exists, although we know that Islamophobia is far worse. It's a form of state racism, which anti-Semitism today isn't. Is Muslims are now demonized as the anti-Semites, most obviously in Germany, but not only in Germany. Muslims are seen as the outsiders, that they are othered in a way that, of course, Jews are now treated almost as kind of tame colonial pets. And we know this. I mean, in his book, The Holocaust in American Life, Peter Novick, who is a liberal, he's not particularly left-wing, remarked on how the Holocaust had caused this upsurge of feeling, this Holocaust narrative had caused this upsurge of feeling amongst American Jews that anti-Semitism was everywhere. And yet he remarked, really, anti-Semitism had almost disappeared in American society. So the more that anti-Semitism disappears, the greater the threat it becomes. And this is because of the deliberate propagation by the state of this belief that Jews are under attack. So in this country, far more money is given to protection of Jewish synagogues than it is to Muslim mosques. It isn't it's synagogues which are attacked, it's mosques which are attacked. We saw that in the riots last year, for example, over the Southport murders. No Jewish synagogue in living memory has been attacked since the fascists in the 1960s. But today, for their own purposes, the ruling class highlights anti-Semitism and plays down or ignores or is participating in racism against every other group, Muslims, black people, and so on. And I suspect that's very much the case in other European countries where Muslims are treated as the outsiders. And that's what Zionism has done in a sense. It has created an ideology of exclusion, as one Israeli poet, Yitzhak Laor, said. I mean, this is what Zionism has been quite happy to do, because Zionism is enabled, in a sense, the integration of the Western alliance with Germany at its heart. And today, when I was reading an article in The Economist only a week ago, that Germany is rearming. It's spending a lot of money now on its army and its military equipment and so on. And we can see, I think, in the near future, that Germany will play an increasingly large part in Western imperial adventures. Thank you.
Anyone else that wants to relate to this?
I will add, or unless someone wants to go first, or Ronnie?
Yeah.
Okay.
Ronnie, you were first.
Yeah,
Thanks very much. I'm going to actually link both those questions together. First of all, the way in which we need to act, Jews and everybody else. So we must get out of simply being in a anti-Zionist Jewish camp. It is very pertinent that Congress in Vienna was a wonderful idea to have an anti-Zionist Jewish Congress. So that factor of anti-Zionist Jews speaking out carries huge weight, but it's got to be involved in the global boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. That is the way, as happened in South Africa, to isolate the colonial settler apartheid regime and to bring pressure to bear, coming to your second point now, Chaim, on all these key, basically Western former colonial powers who stand together in full support of Zionist Israel in terms of their own imperialist neo-colonial interests vis-a-vis the people of Palestine. That's the key moral issue of the time, as Mandela said long ago, and we see it even more so, but against Israel as the tool and the willing tool of Western imperialism, the battleship in the Middle East that the Americans always refer to. So the question of these other Western powers, of course, they don't themselves carry the weight of the guilt, in quotes, of Germany in terms of the Holocaust, but they're part of that same absolute neo-colonial project in terms of their specific imperialist neo-colonial interests. And that's where they stand, and they have to be exposed equally, along with Britain, France, Germany, and the rest of that gang, along with the US imperialism, who is the key threat to humanity as we speak, to the people of Gaza, of Palestine, and that entire Middle East, and today Iran. That's my input on those two questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm asking Wieland to speak.
Thanks. I had put my hand down because I see that time is running out, but I guess I could say in short that I think just a very widespread and easily understood shorthand used by leaders is to speak of Western values, really, because that's also what the anti-Semitism thing is about. And of course, they mean Western imperialist values, but they leave out the imperialist part. So even countries that don't have this guilt history, and I mean, we shouldn't forget that, plenty of countries definitely have anti-Semitic histories, and that, Winston Churchill was very much an anti-Semite. The way he spoke about Jews, there were the harmful Bolsheviks and the useful Zionists. Those were the two. That was really how he divided them. But no, I think I'll leave it there. So the last 2 minutes can be used.
I think I'll allow it to continue for a few minutes. I just wanted to relate to what people speaking mentioned in the terms of the Holocaust being a 6 million operation, and in his encyclopedic and really the most important book on the Holocaust, Raoul Hilberg mentions that the Holocaust actually created 11 million victims. Only about 5.5 million roughly were Jewish. The rest were not. And the second biggest group were Soviet prisoners of war. So please, when you speak about the Holocaust, I'm talking about to the audience, do remember that it wasn't actually a crime against 6 million, but against 11 million. And I'm asking Tom Suarez, I'll just spotlight you.
Thank you. Just briefly to add one more dimension to this, as someone did already mention, Zionism is a Christian invention. It's not a Jewish invention. And as I see it, one of the reasons why it is so difficult for states to distance themselves from the Israeli state is because Israel is, in its essence, it has been a marketing project. And for marketing, it drew on 4 centuries of Christian, essentially Reformation, Protestant marketing research. How do we sell this product that should be unsaleable? And it plays on, especially on the very word Israel, which is a word that we of the West, even secular people, we're wired that this word Israel, it's something apart. It's not part of the regular planet Earth. And I think that obviously this has created the whole realm of Christian Zionism, which is especially bad in the United States. But throughout the West, I think that this was used to establish the state as something that you criticize, you don't criticize not just on the usual political grounds, but because it is something we are hardwired to resist criticizing. We sing about this name in church spirituals. Some of the greatest works of Western art are about this thing called Israel. And I think that even in this supposedly secular age, that this is a force that politicians are afraid to distance themselves from. And it is easier for them to play along with it than to challenge it.
Thank you very much, Tom. And there is a question, I think, probably to Iris, though it is not mentioned personally, but I think Iris would be the best person to answer it. I'll just spotlight you, Iris. Sorry. Yeah, the question is, can we analyze Israel's genocidal actions in terms of what Anna Freud described as identification with the aggressor?
Yes, I saw this question. I mean, maybe I'll start with the question before. There was the question about the concept of Melanie Klein and the reparation, which is fitting more to the title of the webinar today. Because when we are talking psychoanalytically, we are talking about two sorts of guilt feelings, not guilt. Yeah, guilt is when we do something and we are guilty doing that. Guilt feelings is the feelings that we have when we do that. And there is a guilt feeling which is right. That means that if I did something wrong, that I want to do a reparation for that, but I acknowledge the wrong that I did, and I'm not trying to undo that. Now, what Germany is doing is trying to undo the guilt, and they are trying to undo the murdering of the Jews by this conversions program, by cultural life in Germany, protecting Jewish life and inventing Jews. I mean, Christian give or Protestants or German with Nazi background, I would say, give their children names of Jews. So if you're going in Berlin now and to a club and you see 20 years old youth and young people, you think that you might be in an Orthodox area in Jerusalem or in London. So all of them are Samuel and Aaron and Jacob and Esther and Judith. So they produce their Jews themselves. They don't need the real Jews. And we have also other phenomena that shows that this is not a right a way when it is institutionalized and is produced by Germany. Now, as for the identification with the aggressor, you can think about it if you're talking about people who were in concentration camps, for example. So they experience the aggressor and they can identify with the aggressor in order to survive in such a place. You know, we are talking now about fourth generations of Israelis, and some of them, I would say, identify with an aggressor, but the aggressor is sometimes the Israeli state itself. If you're Mizrahi or if you're, I mean, who is going to the army today? We have already data for that. We see ideological groups and people who belong to a social lower class and have the chance to upgrade their situation. So I'm not sure about this mechanism in this case. There is also one thing I would like to add with the question of the world Holocaust. And I think it's important because, I mean, I see the difference. Here we are talking all the time about Holocaust, which is a word that came from Greek, and it means these are the rest of the victim that was burned on the altar, which is very problematic because it has a religious connotation. Now, in Germany, the term that is used is Shoah, because this is the term that is used only for the Jews, which are considered to be the exclusive victims of that. I think it's also very problematic because it has also, Shoah means in Hebrew, a catastrophe that was made by God. So this way, I think Germans, you know, that they can relax and say, I mean, it was God. And also, you know, if you use a term in a foreign language, you can distance yourself from that. So we don't really have a good word for that. But I think genocide is the appropriate word in Germany. Germany doesn't want to use it, and they want to use something exclusive because they do not wish to have this continuity and this narrative that, you know, the genocide during the Second World War was a part of a colonial war, one would say, that the Germany did in Europe. But Germany is insisting on the fact that the Shoah, the Holocaust, is something singular. It happened only once in the history, and therefore the never again is also not necessary. I mean, if it's singular and it happens only once, then they are not really obliged. This is the double game that they are playing with it. But I think therefore genocide is important as a term.
Thank you. I have a question to Wieland. I'm just looking for it because this is moving very quickly. Apologies for the delay.
I did see one in the Q&A that was addressed to me that I actually just answered in type.
Yeah.
Do you mean the one
There you
about
are.
the Berlin
Yeah.
police?
Yeah.
Yeah, 'cause this was the same chief of police that Iris was referring to, who said that the largest part of anti-Semitic violence that occurs is directed at the police. So that shows how, you know, the non-Jewish police stand in for Jews because they are being attacked by these hordes of anti-Semitic demonstrators. So it shows you this real switching of identities and switching of place. And could I maybe just refer to one thing that I think was very important that Ronnie said, where he was saying how Europeans and Germans, they don't want things to be pointed at them and their colonial guilt. And this also relates to the whole exceptionalization of anti-Semitism and of the Jewish part of the Holocaust, because this is also something that, you know, the people in this whole anti-Semitism industry, you know, the various academics and NGO people who make a living out of propagating this narrative, something they cling to very jealously is that, you know, anti-Semitism is different from other racism. Zionism is not colonialism. And also you can't compare the murderous anti-Semitism of the Jews to colonial crimes. And so they completely basically erased the whole colonial dimension of Nazi policy, you know, in Eastern Europe and North Africa. And they really, it's a kind of revisionism. And so also it was very good that some of the personal continuity, you know, was mentioned by Ronnie and also by Tony, like between people who were in Armenia, Namibia, and Germany, involved in all these genocides of different people. So that this was very much not a unique thing that stands outside of the rest, but that is really a continuum, a genocidal continuum.
Most of the questions were actually answered by the panel, but you just related now, Wieland, to another question, which is, do the speakers attribute the rush by Western countries to defend Israel as a residue of their own colonial past? And you answered it. Do any of the others want to relate to this, probably from another colonial background?
Well, yeah, I would like to say one or two things. I'd also like to comment on, I'm trying to see, can you highlight me? Oh, I am, yes, okay, thanks. I mean, for the Zionists, the Holocaust was a product of demonological proportions. It was inexplicable. There was no explanation for the Holocaust. It was, in Daniel's Goldhagen's words, it was the eliminationist mentality of the Germans themselves, which of course is complete nonsense. The Holocaust is extremely easily explained, just like other forms of genocide are. And Hitler made it clear in 1937 in the Hossbach Protocol, when he was lecturing to senior German officers, that he intended to replicate the British Empire, but in Eastern Europe. He called Eastern Europe Germany's India. And it was very clear that imperialism and colonialism was at the heart of what happened. And the idea that somehow the Jewish Holocaust is removed from history is, of course, what the Zionist narrative is. It's unique. It's beyond explanation. It's taken out of history. Because, of course, if you put it in history, then you have to relate it to other forms of genocide, not least that which has been perpetrated by Israel today. And they've also, of course, eliminated the eugenic dimension to the Holocaust, and how Hitler borrowed many of his ideas on that from the United States and what it was doing in terms of forcible sterilization of women. So it takes on a number of dimensions. But I also wanted to comment just on what Iris had said about the problematic nomenclature of what do you call it. I don't think you can call it just a genocide, because Holocaust is so common now. And also, I mean, I call it the Nazi Holocaust in my book, to make it specific as to what it is. But Shoah is an Israeli term, and for all the reasons you gave, it's not appropriate. I mean, the most appropriate word is probably Kurban, destruction, the Yiddish word, but it's not been used very commonly, and so it won't take off. I think we have to just insist that just as there was a Nazi Holocaust, there's an Israeli Holocaust or a Gazan Holocaust, and to make it common property that Holocausts are mass genocides as we are seeing today. And the latest figures from, I think it's from Harvard study, show that maybe 400,000 Palestinians have lost their lives in Gaza. There's been a vast underestimate of the numbers killed, and that approximates to what happened in Africa with the German genocide. So I think we should be clear. But the other thing about Western imperialist narratives is the way they hide their own role during the Holocaust. I mean, Anthony Eden, who was the British foreign minister at the time, was worried that Hitler might expel the Jews rather than exterminate them. Because he said, what would we do with all these Jews? And that was the common attitude at the time. Britain turned its face in the form of Herbert Morrison, the Home Secretary, against admitting Jewish refugees. Well, they could. So the 2,000 who were in the Vittel camp in Vichy, France, who could have been admitted, were turned down, and they were sent to Auschwitz instead. This whole record is eliminated from the US Holocaust Museum, British and other histories of it. Also admitted in the Netherlands. One of the reasons why the Holocaust was so successful there, 75% died, was because the Supreme Court, by a 12-5 majority, adopted the Aryan paragraph, which said that it was quite permissible to exclude Jews from citizenship, including the Chief Justice of their own court, Ludwig Visser. So, I mean, the complicity of Europe in the Holocaust has completely been rewritten from history. And we know the reason why, because they've constructed a new narrative which portrays them as the anti-fascists, which of course they weren't.
Thanks, Tony. I have other questions here. I have some other questions here. But before that, I just want to agree with Tony that we shouldn't let any of the other European countries off the hook. In the book Perfidy, written by Ben Hecht, which is still in print, you can find the story of the Jewish messenger that Eichmann sent to Lord Moyne in Cairo in 1944 from Hungary, offering to free 1 million Jews under some terms, supplying the Reich with lorries to attack the Soviets. Lord Moyne listened to this offer. If it was serious or not, we will never find out, of course. But Lord Moyne had only one thing to say. What am I going to do with 1 million Jews? Where am I going to put them? Definitely not in Britain, we understand. There is a question for Ronnie, and it is, sorry, I'll just highlight you. Just a second. Ronnie, the question is very simple. Israel is doing things which are much worse than South African apartheid was. So how can Palestine be free? I want to add that the UN thought that apartheid was bad enough in 1974 to expel South Africa from the United Nations General Assembly, and it remained expelled until the presidency of Nelson Mandela. So if it was right in 1974 to expel South Africa, and indeed the crime of apartheid was a very serious crime, but how can it be compared to what Israel is doing today? Ronnie?
Well, it's infinitely worse, horrendously worse. In South Africa, we never had, except for a couple of episodes way before the apartheid regime, by the way, under Field Marshal Smuts when he was Prime Minister, when 2 African townships were bombed, one in the protectorate then, as I refer to Southwest Africa, Namibia, and the other within South Africa. And in both cases, a couple of hundred people died. I took issue with my friend Tony Greenstein on one occasion when he said what was taking place had taken place in South Africa was a tea party compared to what was taking place in Palestine. That was a couple of years ago. It was before this Gaza genocide had commenced, or around about. In actual fact, and of course, I wouldn't use the phrase a tea party. It was horrendous, the South African apartheid colonial regime. But this is infinitely worse for obvious reasons. The tanks, the bombings, the killings of women, children, along with the elderly, along with the men, infinitely, infinitely worse. Let me simply say this, that what we're seeing today, and which existed during the South African apartheid period with all those resolutions against apartheid South Africa, and indeed the sanctions which the United Nations had adopted and enforced on the leading countries of this world at that time, was that there was an international law-based order. And what we have seen and are seeing today, including now from Gaza and the surrounding neighboring countries, from Lebanon, Syria, and so on, and now Iran, is what the Americans have termed, and the Europeans have gone tamely along with, is the rules-based order. And that's the rules-based order of the American empire, the US empire, and its acolytes in Europe, those countries we've identified, Heim. And that's why it's so important to call them all out and to have this BDS campaign that I've referred to already as our weapon of global mobilization, international mobilization.
Thank you very much, Ronnie. I think I didn't see that Tom was trying to speak. Would you like to, please, Tom? I'm adding you to the spotlight.
I didn't have my hand up.
Sorry, I got a message that you were trying to speak and I was not letting you, so I thought you were.
No, that wasn't me.
Fine. I think I will ask the last question on the list, and I'll ask it to all of you because I want to give you a chance to have 1 to 2 minutes, please, of last words, each of you. The question, if you wish to answer it, you don't have to, is do you think that the state of Israel will implode in the near future, and what will it take to achieve? I thought that's an interesting question. Seeing that you are here, Tom, do you have anything to say about that?
I don't know. I hear a lot of very informed opinions saying that Israel is about to implode, but that never seems to happen. It's certainly not happening fast enough for its victims. But in my view, it will implode when the US empire implodes. And empires tend to fall precipitously, not slowly. But that is what it will depend on. But no, I think that the region will fall into chaos unless people like us are successful at forcing our governments to change their ways.
Thanks. Wieland, do you have the chance to say a few final words?
Do I have to give my prediction about the implosion of
You
Israel?
don't have to.
Or...
You don't have to.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably most of us who would say that it's a question of when rather than if. But also implosion can take different forms. I mean, I think like something that one asks oneself also, if one follows US-Israeli relations, which although it's easy to forget today, have had their ups and downs. And today you think there is nothing that Israel could do that would not be supported by America and by the West. And at the moment, we're also seeing this tested a bit in the case of Iran, because we have Netanyahu. He wants to escalate to the maximum because he sees that Israel doesn't have the capacity to defeat Iran militarily. It may have better weapons, but it can't keep up the kind of intensity. Iran is a bigger country and it has endurance, so a short victory is not going to happen. In order to actually defeat Iran, and especially to actually blast its nuclear plant in Fordo, it would need American bombs. And within the US security establishment, there is currently a pretty strong conflict going on between, you could say, the new right, the Trump MAGA right, and the older neocon right, because the MAGA right has more kind of isolationist nationalism that is less interested in domination through war, whereas the neocon right is all about that, and they are, were behind the Iraq War. And Trump himself, I think, vacillates, probably depending on who is pandering most to him at any given time. I don't think he really has a coherent agenda on this point.
Before freeing you, I want to raise something that you wrote in the chat, which is a senior German politician said today that Germans should be willing to give their lives for Israel. Is this an invitation of Germany to destroy Iran and the Palestinians?
I don't think it's... I think that's kind of an analytical way of looking at it that wouldn't occur so much to the sort of people who say that. It's all of a piece with, making Germany great again. Also, this is set against the background of many politicians hoping to reintroduce military service. So actually, it could be that in a few years, young adults, or well, barely adults, would maybe be required to fight for Israel. I mean, it's it's sort of hard to imagine, but this is kind of, at least rhetorically, the ground seems to be being prepared for that, by this person at least. And, also the idea of fighting in Ukraine has also been raised before. And then also, again, the comments by Merz about Israel doing the dirty work. It suggests, just above all, that there's actually a total alignment just between all these imperialist forces. So, whether it's Israel fighting Iran, or Germany arming Ukraine or whatever, it's, with the same team, which is clear anyway. But I think it actually helps for these things to be stated very clearly, so that, even people who maybe don't analyze as much as some of us can just see it.
Thanks. I'll bring Iris in. Iris, is it now taking a genocide to make America or Germany great again?
Or on the contrary, actually, I mean, we know what happens when Germany made the last genocide, the Holocaust. And I think also it relates to the question that you asked about the Israeli society. I mean, is Israel going to implode? I guess we have a need as human beings, to have some catharsis. So we want either a salvation that everything will be good, or the big explosion that, just to finish with it. I guess none of them is going to happen, but it's quite clear that the Israeli society, my analysis was usually the image of like a psychotic person, Israel, who is here and then having psychotic episode and is bombing Gaza. That was the case during the last decades. And if you follow that, you see that the intervals between these psychotic episodes became shorter, and also between the elections. And now we have a psychotic society in mass psychosis, who is getting also weapon all the time. No impunity, no accountability. Nobody is stopping Israel. So when you're going on this path, it's like Nazi Germany. This state of mind, this megalomanic state of mind, the idea that you can play God and decide who has a good life and who is worthy living and who isn't, then the destruction is built in. A society cannot exist even after Israel will destroy all of Iran. Let's say that they will be successful, and they will successful. Yeah, it's a horrible, horrible scenario if they will turn Iran into a country like Iraq. But then they have to deal with themselves, which they can't. They have to be in this state of ongoing attacking the others, because if they will stop and they will see what they did until now, they will commit suicide.
Thanks. I want to bring Tony in, but I want to say to you that this webinar is being recorded and will be available on the JNP website probably tomorrow, but definitely next week. And I will bring Tony in, saying that I think the webinar was booked for 2 hours, so we might all be disconnected.
No, it won't disconnect.
Okay. Just a second.
The European Union was formed originally as the Iron and Steel Coal Community, and it was basically to negate the possibility of German imperialism resurrecting itself and attacking its neighbors. I think we are now seeing German imperialism beginning to rise. Whether we have intra-European conflict in the future, I don't know, but I raise it as a possibility, no more. As for Israel, I think we're seeing the beginning of the end of Zionism. How long that will take, I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. But I don't think Israel can continue indefinitely along the path that it's going. It had a relatively stable period before 1967. Then it conjured up messianic Zionism once again, and it let loose the Ben Gavirs. At first, they were a small minority, but now what, 900,000 I've heard may be the number of settlers. So they're forming a critical mass in Israeli society. And for anyone who's secular and Western, that poses very, very real problems, not least because the religious Zionists, the Haredi, who are not necessarily settlers, are parasitic on the Israeli economy. They, by and large, don't work, but they do take. And there comes a time when those who are producing the wealth say thank you and goodbye. So I do think Israel is laying the seeds of its own demise. I've often said, I mean, in the past, that Israeli society would already have imploded if not for the Palestinians. It's a common enemy that binds them together. Remove the common enemy, and Israelis may fall on themselves. But Israel is also extending itself into the region, and that is also going to weaken it as well. It's going to be in a perpetual war, and how many of its citizens will simply emigrate because they don't want to live in a perpetual war society is open to debate. So Israel faces major problems, and we can see that with Iran, where it's bitten off more than it can chew. Iran is much stronger than Iraq was in terms of its response back here in 2003, which is why Israel's gone running to the United States. And there is a debate, as Beelan says, amongst the American ruling class. I mean, for all his bluster, Trump has done nothing yet. And they're in two minds because they don't want to set up a conflagration in the whole Middle East. It won't necessarily help American imperialism's interest, not least because they wanted to focus on China. So they don't want to get embroiled in yet another Middle East war. So the options, I think, are quite limited. What Trump does, who can tell? I mean, it's impossible to second guess the man because he's not rational or coherent. I mean, that's what's made him so attractive in many ways, which says a lot about American society. But I think coming back to the topic of the way that Holocaust narrative has been developed, of course, what is missed out of it all is that when Hitler came to power, barely 2% of German Jews were Zionists. I mean, the Zionists gained their power within the German Jewish community precisely because they formed, in essence, a de facto alliance with key parts of the Nazi state, the SS in particular. I mean, Eichmann was on record, he said in his interview that if he'd been Jewish, he would have been an ardent Zionist. He complains in this interview with the Dutch Nazi journalist Sassen that how much he had complained about the desecration of Herzl's grave in Vienna. I mean, Eichmann was a Zionist. The Nazis were very pro-Zionist because they saw them as the racial Jews. And what Germany is doing today is eradicating the memory of the German Jewish community and how they resisted Zionism for years, even into the Third Reich. They were not prepared to accept that they were second-class citizens or not citizens at all, because, of course, the Nuremberg laws had removed them. So I'll leave it at that. But
well,
we have a rewriting of history.
We've been talking for over 2 hours. Thank you, the panel, for doing an enormous and impressive job of both speaking and answering the questions. I just want to say, in relation to the last two speakers' points, that 1 million Israelis already left Israel since the 7th of October. And we read this week that Israel is not allowing anyone to leave. In other words, Israelis are now incarcerated in the killing zone and are not allowed to leave and have no way of leaving. But Israelis are very inventive. And in the last 3 days, between 30 and 40,000 have taken boats to Cyprus. So Cyprus is now overtaken by tens of thousands of Israelis who ran away and broke the blockade that their own government has put on them. So this is interesting news and probably points out why Israel is not going to wait and implode together with the US, but may do its own job earlier. Thank you for all the speakers. Thank you for all 246 of you that stuck it out for more than 2 hours. And we will place the recording next week on the JNP website. Thank you very much.